Before we begin, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Liao Hui-Chun. Now, currently, Hui-Chun is an advisor in Glenelg Economics since 2024, where she brings a wealth of expertise and experience in research and analysis in the palm oil markets to Glenelg's Oil and Oilseed Monthly Analysis. Formerly, she has spent 23 years with UOB Kay Hian as a Director of Asian Plantation Research. And besides that, Hui-Chun has also presented at numerous conferences, sharing her expertise and market outlooks on listed plantation companies and also vegetable oil markets. So without further ado, let me pass this presentation over to Hui-Chun. Hui-Chun, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, CY. And good evening, everyone. Let me share my slide now. Yep, CY, can you confirm you can see my slides?
Yes, your slide is up.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So I think the last we talked about other factors that affecting the crude palm oil. And today we will zoom down into a more specific, analyzing the fundamental drivers in the crude palm oil, or in the short form, we call it the CPO market. Okay, I think before studying into the CPO market, let's look at the contracts that is offering by Bursa Malaysia. Sure. I'm sure you're aware that Bursa Malaysia also offer this soybean futures contract, which is FSOY. And this FSOY is actually a combination of products, referring to the DCE, which is short form for Dalian Commodity Exchange, whereby the DCE soybean oil futures contract is a final settlement price used as a basis to calculate this FSOY's final settlements price in US dollar. And then why we need this is an interesting and related product to the CPO, because the potential in trading say FSOY, because the price correlation between the soybean and palm is very high, and there is also with this contract is also enable you to diversify and reduce your risk, since palm oil and soybean oil are correlated, but sometimes they're influenced by different factors, and there's there's a spread trading opportunity between the products. So with this contract also you gain exposure to the global vegetable oil market trend. So I think for more details on the details about this FSOY, you can actually check out the websites. The Bursa website have the key details of how this DCE soybean oil futures work. So as I mentioned just now, this contract, there is a correlation. As you see, I have pulled out the prices of the BMD CPO price and also the Dalian Exchange DCE soybean oil prices. As you can see, these both prices actually move in tandem. They are highly correlated with each other. But in certain times, you can see one of the prices have react overly bullish or overly bearish. This creates the opportunity for you to take to play within the two spreads. So, but in the trend side, they are both move in tandem, because these both oil are substitutable, and to the certain extent, similar factors will affect both prices. So this is the correlation between the BMD CPO and the DC SPO active contracts price movement. So now we move on to the key topics of today. What's the fundamentals of the palm oil productions and demand? So we'll go into the trends of this. So I think palm oil supplies, right, is highly dependent on Indonesia. So I have pulled out the bar charts of the key producing countries, the palm oil producing country. You can look at it. Part of it, Indonesia contributed about 59% of the world palm oil outputs, followed by Malaysia at 24%. And the distant number 3 and number 4 is really a distant number 3 and 4, where Thailand came in as the third producer, having a market share of about 4%, and it followed by Colombia about 2.5%, and the rest of the world make up by 10%. So this explains that Indonesia is a very major market. There's a lot of questions for us, how is the contribution from the Africa or from Latin America? As you can see, they are very small player. And also in Latin America, there's a very high cost of labor and other set of problems with the land tenure, and also restricting of the development will actually limit the expansion in Latin America and also in West Africa. So the next chart, there's a point here on the right hand charts here. You can look at it on the production side. Malaysia production have been quite stagnant. This is the one that I pulled out from 2010 to 2025. So you can see since 2010 till 2025, for over the last 15 years, you are seeing that the Malaysia productions have been hovering between the 17 Dylan to about 19. The highest we have is 19.9. But if you look at the one that Indonesia is the one that driving the output growth. So what is the driver behind this? It's very clear that the driver behind this growth is come from the land expansion. If you look at the land expansion, Indonesia have a very rapid land expansion since like 1998 and 2000. If you recall, because of the El Nino in 1995, we have a big run on the prices in 97, 98, and that create we see a spike in the land areas. There they hit the Asia financial crisis. There's been a slowdown. But post-year 2000, because of the good CPO prices, we see that Indonesia have very fast in expanding their land bank. But interestingly, if you look at the expansion of the land bank in Indonesia, the growth of the planted area has started slowing down. So you can see on your right-hand side, the expansions, large expansion is from 2024 up to like 2016, 2015. So since then, it's just coming down off. And Malaysia, we have started on the declining trend. We have seen like the matured area or the planted in Malaysia on the declining trend. So which means that there is a limited growth in the suitable land for expansions in both Malaysia and Indonesia. And that is also explained why, the productions wise, we are seeing quite a flattish growth nowadays. And also, I think the growth going forward is also limited by this age profile. So as you know that when oil palm trees are planted, it takes 3 years for to maturity, and these trees can produce up to the years of 100 years. The oldest trees that we have in Malaysia is about 117 years old. They are still producing. The only problem is the tree get too tall, and you have issues of doing the harvesting, because you need very strong skill. Imagine that you have to hold a pole of 10 feet to harvest the fruits. So that become a problem, and to get a skilled harvester is also another issue. So if you look at it, we always hear that Malaysia trees are aging. You have a high aging tree at the aging, and also the old tree about 22%. Old tree means that referring to trees that are above the 25 years old. Okay, so but if you look at Indonesia, are they better than us? Are they better than Malaysia? If you look at the breakdown, they are actually not really very far from Malaysia. They also have a high percentage of trees at the aging age, and they have 2% at the old age, which means that they also have trees that are above 30 years and yet to be replanted. So this aging age that we have to take notes, because the aging age is actually slow down the production growth in both Malaysia and Indonesia. So we also have to look at it from the production side. Beside the planted area and the age, of course, this translates into the productivity. How we measure the productivity of the oil palm is always we use the FFB, the fresh fruit bunch per hectares, tons per hectares they produce. And we are looking at how much oil they can produce from each tons of this FFB. So we call it as an oil yield. So in terms of the palm oil yield per hectare, which means that how much CPO you can produce from per hectare basis, we are looking at it, you can see very clearly from 2010. There's a downtrend from the Malaysia side. Malaysia is on a downtrend. If I pull this data back to 1990, you can see we have a spike, and then since then it's flat and now coming down off. And again, Indonesia, we have quite a good up, but lately you can see Indonesia, because due to the age profile, Indonesia yield is also on a declining stage. So which means that the growth, the supply growth also slowed down by the stagnating yields. And what are the key contributors to this? Of course, first of all, this is a very famous questions, and the problem the Malaysia facing, labor issue. The workers shortage has impacting the harvesting and also upkeep of the estate. So Malaysia is the country that's highly dependent on the foreign workers. So we have close to in Sabah Sarawak, close to 95% of the workers at the estates are all foreigners, are mainly coming from Indonesia. For the Peninsula Malaysia, it's also as high as 75 to 80% also depending on the foreign workers. So if you recall during the COVID times, when Malaysia actually stopped the intake of the foreign laborers, or there is a disruptions in terms of the traveling between the countries, you can see Malaysia yields actually dropped quite significantly. This is 2019, we have a COVID time, and you can see the yield drop quite drastic because we do not have enough labor to harvest and to maintain. Okay, then as I mentioned, the age profile, aging tree also, they are less productive, and also some trees are getting too tall, and you can't harvest when you do not have enough harvester or enough labor. You tend to forego the high tree first. You will focus on the younger tree and the shorter tree where you can harvest easier. So this is also contributing to the factors. So we need to see more replanting in Malaysia and Indonesia to regenerate the youngerize the age profile to have a better productivity, and also with the new seed, it gives you a better oil yield per hectares. And on top of that, there's also a pest and disease pressure. We are seeing the spread of Ganoderma in Malaysia and also in Indonesia. And Ganoderma is the only disease that causes will kill the tree, and there's no cure, there's no solution for it. The only thing is you have to do your replanting or your land preparation in a proper way, and also you must have a good knowledge on the ground and on the groundwork that you do to identify the Ganoderma problem as early as possible, prevent this Ganoderma to spread. However, this Ganoderma have a very high spreading rates during the COVID time, when there is a shortage of worker and there's lack of site visits by the limitation of traveling from a lot of the estate managers. Like, they are not able to travel between estate to estate. So that during that time we see a lot of spreading, and that's one of the reasons causing the yield drop in Malaysia as well. And the rest, we have the pests, like the rats, the mealybugs, the bagworms. So these are the common pests that we see at the estate, and this require a lot of ground check to prevent this to spread. Also, on top of the final factors I want to highlight is the poor agronomy practices. So as the land expansion was very fast in Indonesia, as we see just now, a lot of land that have been growing in towards the later part of the years was planting on the less suitable land. And also the seed contamination and the suboptimal fertilizer application. All these poor agronomic practices will lead to the bad performance on the trees. And remember, when you plant a tree, only 3 years they come to maturity, and especially on the seed contamination, you may only find out you have a seed problem up to when you reach the prime age, when the tree is supposed to give you 28 to 30 tons of FFBU at the age of 8, 9, 10 to 12, and you can consistently say that, hey, why my areas are not producing? We are still stuck at 17 or 20 tons. Then you start to find out actually the seed that you plant is the seed that you used to plant in that 10 years ago is not the good seed. What are you going to do? Are you going to take down the tree and plant again? Or what are you going to do? I think that will be the next things they have to consider, because these areas are big. When you take out 1, 2 trees from the areas and you plant with a new seed, and because of the differential of the age profile, it will actually have a problem on the harvesting, because the harvester will go one round and then you suddenly have two or three few trees are very young. That actually will give a problem on have a better the proper harvesting round. So I think that is also why some of company will just let the tree grow and wait for the next replanting cycle to replant with the new seed. So these are the problems that we are seeing why the yields are dropping. And also, after we look at the production side, how about on the consumptions? So consumption is also another factor, right? Anything on the direction on the palm prices, you are supply and demand. So it's always supply demand determine the prices. So if you look at the consumption, interestingly, Indonesia is not only the world largest palm oil producer. Indonesia is also the world largest palm oil consumer. They consume close to 30% of the world production. So Indonesia is the largest, and second largest in line is India. That's about 11%. You have followed by the China and EU. So Malaysia's come in as only 5% of the total productions is under Malaysia. Consumption is Malaysia. So again, if you look at the share, the annual palm oil consumptions from year 2010 to 2025, you can see the growth is mainly come from Indonesia, whereas the rest of the country is either flattish or just a small increase in the consumption. And what drives the Indonesia consumptions? The Indonesia consumption is driven up mainly by their biodiesel mandate. They have a very aggressive biodiesel mandate since 2016. They started at like 5%. As today, they have 40% biodiesel mandate, which means that the diesel selling at the pump that's actually blended with 40% palm oil. So they use the palm oil to produce a metal ester, which is a similar characteristic of the diesel. They blend it together, and this is sold at the pump at 40% blending. And Indonesia has the world's highest biodiesel blending mandate. It's the highest in the world. So now currently more than 50% of their domestic consumptions is actually go into the biodiesel. And of course, we are hearing that they are going to further increase to B50, and they also target to move it to B100, which is something that we're not sure whether how they're going to do it. But biodiesel is the one that drives the Indonesia consumption. So if you look at it, as I mentioned, the biodiesel is the biggest growth in terms of the consumption. If you look at it, if you look at the breakdown, palm oils are used in the food, biodiesel, oleochemical, and other industrial use. And share of the non-food has up, from barely 8% in 2000, around 7% in year 2000, and now it's close to 27%. So this exponential growth is all driven by the biodiesel. If you look at the light green here, it's an exponential growth. And also we are seeing more and more of the palm oils are going into the oleochemical as well, and other food others application. So food remains still the largest, about 70%. Okay. So in the past, the non-food use is mainly for the oleochemical, but now increasingly it's more for the biodiesel. So what are the factors that we need to watch and need to monitor come to the demand? So I've actually highlighted some of the key factors for the major consuming market like Indonesia, India, EU, China, the Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa, and US. Of course, ultimately the main factors that drive the demand for the oil palm or for the global vegetable oil market is come from the income growth. So it's highly correlated between the income growth and the demand growth, or I would say the GDP growth and the demand growth. So when you have a better GDP growth, you can see overall all the demands will go up. And being the staple food, you can see the demand for veg oil also on the will increase in tandem. But for each country, we also need to monitor other factors. So interestingly, like Indonesia, biodiesel mandate is very critical. As I mentioned, more than 50% of their domestic oils is actually used. I think close to 50% of the domestic oils is used in the biodiesel. And also they have policy, very protective policy. So Indonesia keep changing their policy to protect their local market. If you recall, back in 2023, they actually banned the palm oil export for a couple of, close to about 45, I think it's about 3 weeks they banned it and caused the CPO prices to go. So these are the policy we need to monitor. And India also, beside the growth, you also have to see the local oilseed production, the import duty structure, and also the domestic pricing for different oil. Because as like what we have in our previous session, we did talk about the competing oil. So the competing, most of like the palm, soybean oil, rapeseed, sunflower oil, they are interchangeable or they're substitutable. So what prices sell at the local market will determine what oil they use. So these are the things that we need to monitor. So I think China also, interestingly, the soybean oil prices, because China crush a lot of soybean for their animal feed, and as a byproduct, they also produce soybean oil. So as recently, we see China crush a lot of soybean. They have a lot of soybean oil in the market, and the Chinese soybean oil prices is much cheaper than the palm oil. So that's why palm oil are not able to sell in China as the consumer cooking oil. They use it only for a very specific functional use in China. Okay, these are the factors that you can go through later as this slide will be shared. Okay. So, and the biodiesel, as I mentioned, biodiesel is the main driver for veg oil. And you look at it, the dominated, this is for the whole world, the vegetable oil for the biodiesel market. So Indonesia is about 19%, EU is about 26%, and US is about 19%. And if you look at all these markets, right, very interestingly, most of the biodiesel, the country that we biodiesel maintain, usually they are also the largest veg oil producer. EU, rapeseed oil, US, soybean oil, Indonesia is about palm oil, Brazil is soybean, China is more for the ethanol side, more so, and also they are using the used cooking oil for their biodiesel. Argentina, you see, all these are mainly the big veg oil producer. They are the main biodiesel player as well. So as I mentioned, Indonesia biodiesel is the most aggressive one. You look at the volume, and they take up like now as 2026, we're expecting there will be close to about 38%. If they're pushing ahead of B50 and so on, I think you will see this number will go even at 50% or even higher than that. And they are very much on track. When they say they want to do B40, they will do. It's a matter of time whether there's a delay a couple of months or a slight delay. They will always go according to plan. As I mentioned, the non-food use are actually the one that driving the Indonesia domestic demand. So what are the seasonal factors that you need to watch out in palm market? Because, palm is a seasonal, they produce whole year long. So not every quarter or every month you have the same production. So this is on the production pattern. So if you look at it, combining the Malaysia and Indonesia production, so the light green represent Malaysia and the dark green represent Indonesia. So I combine the both productions from year 2000. This is a monthly production. And you can see there's always a bell shape, right? Start from a low peak somewhere in August, September, and October, and it will be a sharp drop in the production subsequently November, December, January, and February. And the trend continue. So this is a seasonality that you need to aware. And usually you look at it, it's third quarter is have the highest production. And come to the final quarter and the first quarter, the production is low. So what is the reason behind these seasonality patterns? So before I go on to the particular reason, and here to say, this is also, I think the typo, there I have a typo here. This is on the CPO productions and the average monthly rainfall. So this seasonal productions, the monthly productions is actually affected by the rainfall. So as we stay in Malaysia or Indonesia, we know there is a monsoon season. So the monsoon season, the high rainfall season, always start from the fourth quarter. Sometimes it starts as early as October, or sometimes it starts in November, December, and it extended into the subsequent year of January to February. And this year we see it go into the March. So because of the rain, you can see when the rainfall is high, the production is low. When the rain starts to ease, the production starts to pick up. So this trend is actually affected by the rainfall. So this rainfall explains why we have this seasonality. So on the demand side, it's also interestingly, you can see the demand. There is also a trend in demand. There's also a trend in demand. So if you look at it, the demands, right? We have also high demand usually during the month of like May until the month of October, or sometime into November. So we have a high production in the third quarter, but we have a rising demand usually start from the first quarter into the early fourth quarter. So usually like March or April until October, November. And this patterns is actually driven by few factors. So of course, first of all, you have to look at the Ramadan or the Lebaran. In Indonesia, they call Hari Raya as Lebaran. During this festive season, usually you will have a high demand. And for the key market like India and China, we have to monitor their festive season. Like India, you have the Deepavali, they're coming in October. So usually India will buy more palm oil, more vegetable oil from the June onwards. So that's create the seasonality. And China is another major market. It's also followed like when the Chinese New Year, when you have the Golden Week holiday, the Mid-Autumn Festival. So these are the major festive season that will drive the high demand. And also uniquely, palm oil is also, usually there will be a higher demand during the summertime because palm oil will tend to crystallize. Or you can see sometimes you go to the supermarket, the hypermarket, if the aircon is too cold, is too strong, you can see when you go to the cooking oil section, sometimes you can see some of the like a solid crystal white things on the bottom of the oil. So it's nothing to do, the oil is not spoiled because of that. It's just like the palm come to a cold weather, it will crystallize. So it will like harden a bit. So once you take it out from the rack and you bring home, it will become liquid again, it become golden color again. So which means that come to the winter month, if you want to you want to export the palm oil, you need to heat it up. So the cost of transportation or exporting become higher. So during the time, winter months is usually we see a lower demand, especially from the country that have these 4 seasons. So that's explain why it comes to the fourth quarter. November, December, January, usually you also can see the demand for palm is lower. So these are the seasonality factors that we need to watch. So of course, the other factors that we need to monitor that will affect the palm is when is the availability of competing veg oil. Competing veg oil, the major one is come from the soybean because they are the second largest competing oil. We have rapeseed and sunflower, which are smaller volume, but sometimes they create the noises in the market. So if you look at it, right, come to because this is an annual crops and there was planting and harvesting seasons. So usually if you look at it, the planting seasons of all these crop happens towards the second and the third quarter. And they only start harvesting towards the late third quarter, and in fourth quarter, the harvesting will start. So which means that interestingly, usually during the months like March to July or sometimes April to June, July, most of these competing oil are not in the market. And that is also one of the reasons explain why palm oil demand are relatively better or higher during the second, third quarter, because there's less availability of competing oil. So this creates the seasonality as well. So if you look at it, to summarize the things, the 2 things from the production and the export trend, you can see this is like a tale of 2 halves. So we have lower productions in the first half and higher production. So this is the patterns, right? The monthly production as a percent of annual. I take an average from 2020 to 2024. And this is the export patterns for Malaysia, Indonesia as well, from 2020 to 2024. So the monthly productions as a percentage of annual and monthly export as a percentage of the annual export. So you can see we have it's a usual trend that we have higher productions in second half. So usually the production range is like 42 to 47 in first half. It's about 42 to 45 pattern of 48%, but you have like 52 to 55% in the second half in term production. Interestingly, if you look at the export, we also have the same. Low production in the first half and higher, low export in the first half and higher towards the second half. So this is interestingly, and because of this pattern, right, you can see palm oil tend to be more volatile. The price movements are more volatile towards the middle of the year until the end of the year, because this is a time when there's more supply and more demand. If the supply go above expectation, prices will have a negative correlation. If the if the export is supposed to come, it didn't come in the third quarter, we see accumulating of stocks, then they will create the volatility in prices. So these are the factors that we need to monitor in terms of the supply and demand. So what is the outlook like for the palm oil productions and demand? So this one we are looking at as a bit on the trend side. So palm oil productions are very subjective, very sensitive to the weather patterns. So when it's and this palm tree needs a lot of water. So when we have the El Nino, it's especially very disruptive to the production trend. It's very clear that every time after the El Nino, the production will drop, because when the tree is under the water stress, the tree will tend to rest. When the tree tend to rest, they will produce less. So as a result of that, you will see the yield drop because it's the yield stress and the productivity will down. So which means that when you have a low oil yield, every hectares of land produce less CPO per hectare. So you can see production drop. And there's always a very interesting, there will be a compensations impact after a downtrend. So it's just like a human being. So when we are under the sun, too hot, you don't drink enough water, you start to sick. Once you say you take the rest, after that, you recover, your energy come back, you can back to the full activity. So you can see after the stress, the recoveries are very strong. So the recovery also depending on how stressed is the tree, are the trees, and then what's the level of the water stress. So every year after the El Nino, production will drop. So 23, 24, we have a drought, but it's not a very severe drought as we compared to 2015 and 2019. So because of that, we look at it, 2025, we are seeing a good recovery in production. 2024 is a slight decline, especially from the Indonesia. They're still the major. And if you ask, hey, why Malaysia do not have the drought impact? And why this one so bad? So recall that, as I mentioned, right, 2019, 2020, during 2020 and 2021, 22, during the COVID time, we do not have the label. So the production dropped very sharp. So 23, 24, do we suffer the El Nino? Yes, but it's not so bad as compared to Indonesia. Indonesia have the worst drought, compared to Malaysia. And at the same time, Malaysia start to get the label coming in from the end of 2023 and more coming in 2024. As a result of that, this label is going to do a better maintenance, better harvesting. So this efficiency actually overrides some of the impact, and you can see that will be a production growth here. So 2025, both countries are seeing a slight growth in that. So we are seeing quite a good productions in both Malaysia and Indonesia in 2025. And this is our expectations of the Malaysia side. So, but fortunately, I think despite high production, because we have a very good export as well. So we are looking at it, the end stock for Malaysia, Indonesia is not going to be high. As a result of that, the prices are quite well maintained. And if you look at it, come to the weather, how are we looking at the weather for the next year, 2026? So because whatever weathers are happening now will impact the productions in the next 1 year or even next 2 years. So as I mentioned, 2023 we have a drought, and you can see, the droughts are mainly happen in the second quarter. And then come to the 2024, Indonesia actually have a very good weather. Malaysia is a little bit more red spot, which is a bit on the dry side. That's why you look at it, 2025, Indonesia have a good recovery, and Malaysia recovery is a bit mild because we still have some dryness here and there, very patchy dryness in Malaysia. And we enter into the very dry seasons in July. If you recall, Indonesia have the bushfires, right? Especially in the Sumatra and also the Kalimantan, and they created a panic in the market because the dryness have burned some of the estate, and then people start worrying about what's the impact on production. So we are looking at it, but fortunately, come to the August month, we have a good rainfall, and September again we have a good rainfall. So this will actually very supportive. This weather is actually very supportive for a relatively good production for 2026 as well. So as I mentioned, we have quite a good year. If you look at even the droughts that we have in 2025 is very mild. So this shows you that whenever there is an increase of hotspots, there's a drop in the yield, because when the weather is too dry, there's more hotspots, right? So when this hotspot indicating how severe is the dryness. So 2014, you can see very dry and the drop, but the rest of the year in Malaysia are not relative. Even 2023, the hotspot in Indonesia is higher than Malaysia. That's why Indonesia have more severe declines in yield as compared to Malaysia. So when people highlight to you there's hotspot or there's dryness, you need to counter check how bad is the hotspot, what is the number relatively to the past, because the hotspot happening in Indonesia and Malaysia, especially on the peat soils, are pretty often, because peat soil is very easy to catch fire. Even during the dry season, a single bud can cause the estate to have the hotspot. So peat soils areas are usually tends to have a higher risk on burning during the hot month. So, but we still have to see whether how many hotspots during that month or during the particular quarter relatively to the past. So sometimes it's just like for a very short period, like this year, July is just a very short period, then we see a good rainfall coming in. So the yield impact may not be that severe. So the higher price, if you look at on the demand side, demands, we have been saying that good GDP growth will have a good demand. We can see, but however, if you look at it, right, especially like recently, we are seeing a little bit on a declining trend on some for the palm oil side, because in the past, palm oil always known as the cheapest oil in the world, the cheapest veg oil in every single market. But palm oil prices have been stayed above the markets, above the premium. Very frequent nowadays that palm trade at premium to is competing, especially in soybean oil. And in certain market, we are seeing palm oil has been higher than the soybean oil for the last 1 year, especially like in China. Palm is like 800 renminbi more expensive than the palm oil in China. So we are seeing because of these high prices, palm is actually losing some of the market share. You can see the downtrend as well. Yeah, but of course, some markets, when the price change, it come back very fast, especially like India. India is the largest palm oil importing country. So if you look at it, right, if you notice a couple of months, like in the beginning of the year, on your right hand, if you see my pointer here, January, February, March, and April 2025, we are seeing a very sharp drop in the palm oil import by India. If you look at the dark green side, and it replaced by soybean oil and sunflowers. Okay, what happened here? So if you look at the price chart here, if you look at these few months, right, CPO market is actually one of the highest. You see, CPO market was the most expensive. Palm oil was the most expensive oil in India from December 2024, and then occasionally they trade a discount and it back. But interestingly, once the palm trade cheaper than the rest of the oil, you can see the demand for India just spiked up. So India is a very sensitive country, price sensitive country. So when it's expensive, they can move to other side very fast. When you become cheap, they will come back to you. So that's why prices it's a very price sensitive country. So for China, if you look at it, as I mentioned, China's palm oil has been trading at a premium. So this red line is a parity for the both prices. Price below the red line, palm is at a premium. Above, palm oil is cheaper. So palm oil has been trading at a premium to soybean oil since I think October 2024 or November 2024 has been there. So it's about a year already. And the biggest discount we have back in 2022 is about 3,000. So now we are trading about 800. And if you can look at it, palm oil demands in China have been dropping. It's a very clear cut that it's a dropping line. And you look at it, the base demands have been getting lower and lower. Okay, so this is what happened that we're looking at the China market. And as I mentioned, China import a lot of soybean. When they crush a lot of soybean, there's a lot of soybean oil in the market. And that's the reason why soybean prices is cheaper than palm also in China market. Come to EU, again, EU demands have peaked in 2020, and it also start on a declining trend. And if you look at it, which market had been lost the most in EU for the palm oil, it's actually for the biodiesel, because EU has basically so-called restrict palm oil to be used as a biodiesel feedstock. But some of the palm oil base still can be go in, but it's very small compared to the past. Palm oil that as a go in for the fuel, for the biofuel use in Europe is actually half of their amount. So we are now back to a very basic use for the food, and these are mainly as a functional use. They as an ingredient for their end product processing, like some for their chocolates or for their personal hygiene products. So it's more like a functional product, not as an end food user. Of course, they don't use palm as a cooking oil there, right? So it's more to as a functional oils in EU. So I think Indonesia is still the largest palm oil user, as I mentioned. The biodiesel is the major use and the growth for the Indonesia, and this is the one of the biggest support and the supporting factor to the elevated price that we are seeing today. So what are the key factors driving the palm oil prices? So I have pulled out these charts, which is like the 1 year price chart. So you can see any hiccups in Indonesia biodiesel policy will have actually affect. And also from the 2024 onwards, we are seeing increasingly a lot of speculative funds that participate in the Dalian exchange, and that created the run on the prices. The volatility also created by these speculative funds. And if you look at it, as I mentioned, when you have a high rainfall, unusual high rainfall, or you have a dryness, the price tend to like move up or down according to the weather as well. So, but very obvious, you can see is usually is a lot driven by the Indonesia and US biodiesel factors that drive the big movement in the palm oil price. So what other factors that you need to monitor for as a key noises? So these are the major announcements that are coming out, the data announcement. Because this data announcement is actually, the traders will have their expectation. It's not about you up how much or you down how much. If sometimes people will say, hey, production is up, why price go up? It's always a relatively to what market expect. So what are the key factors key date that you have to remember? During this period of time, prices tend to be more volatile is when Malaysia announcing the MPOB monthly data, the Malaysia Palm Oil Board announcing the monthly data. Usually it's on the 10th. Sometimes it depends. It's weekend, there will be a delay. And coincidentally, after 2 days, you will see USDA, US Department of Agriculture will announce their data as well for the US progress of the soybean planting, their corn, their wheat, and also they will give the estimation of the world agriculture demand and supply. Of course, people will tends to monitor what's the US production and also what is the soybean production in Brazil and Argentina that is forecasted by the USDA. So this all will create a big noises, a movement in the price. And of course, then subsequently you have the India announcing their monthly data, like the import data also. And China custom data usually come on the 20th of each month. So these are the few key dates that you have to remember. The volatility of prices, plus and minus these few dates, usually it will be a little bit higher than usual. And this one, as I mentioned, why this MPOB data is very important, because if you look at the MPOB data, right, price and stock is negative correlated. So when inventory go up, prices will come down. So you can see when inventory go up, prices will weaken. When inventory go down, prices will tends to drop. So we have to monitor the trend of the CPO stocks level. So if you think that market expecting, like you look at here, right? Although the trend is up, why CPO prices up? Of course, it affected by other factors as well. But looking at here, production is already peaked. So which means that if you have any inventory build up, it's already done during these few months. So maybe the subsequent months inventory will not keep building. So market is a forward-looking market. So you have to see, after this one, so as I mentioned, right, the production subsequently will come down. So you have to see whether how much is the production decline. Is that how's the weather? Is it still a good weather for the shipments to move out to those countries with the winter seasons, and all these factors you have to see, and that actually affects. So of course, whenever there is a very big spike up in stocks and market aspect, like you look at it, we hit a 3 million in January in 2019, right? The prices actually dropped quite drastically. And since then, prices have moved up. Of course, this is a time when I mentioned, right? Indonesia have a ban on the CPO export and caused the price to spike out. Okay. And weather impact, if you recall the previous slide, a couple slides ago, I always highlight El Nino event because oil palm need a lot of water. So when it's too dry, you can see when too dry, there will be an impact on production. So the yield will drop, production will drop, and the production drop can be up to 30%. So how do you see if like, when you're driving along the plus highway or the highways, you can see the trees, you can see sometimes when we drive, we know that whether the tree is under stress. And this is in the time you can see the whole tree, there's no fruits on the tree. These are all the male flowers because one oil palm tree come up with male and female flowers. They produce both flowers. Every 2 weeks, they have one frond and one frond, they have one flowers. And on the norm, usually one tree have close to about 75% or 80% of female flowers. So when they're under stress, they can be only producing 40% of female. And at these trees, right, you can see there's no female flowers, all the male flowers. That's why there's no fruits. So this is the very clear indicators that there would not have any production coming to the market for the next 4 to 12 months. So from here, actually, there is a way that to see how's the demand. When it comes to the flooding, it's also no good. When you look at it, when they're flooding, the estate flooded, the tree will not die. Even you flooded for 1 month or 2 months, the oil palm tree will not die. It's a very strong. It's just like how to harvest. How to harvest this. Some using sampan, but you tend to lose a lot of fruits as well, the loose fruit. Right? How to collect the loose fruit, how to transport the fruits out from the estate to the mill, how's the mill going to transport the oil to the refinery. So these are very short-term impact. So as a result, you look at it on the La Nina, when there's a prolonged wet condition, the production will down, but it's not as severe as El Nino. But in the longer term, as tree need a lot of water, other dry wet season will be good for the productions 1 year later. So if you remember, just like I show you the rainfall, the weather pattern charts, right? As I mentioned, there's not many dry season, not much of dry season from 2024 to 2025. So we are seeing recovery and we will be seeing a better production into 2026. So the price movement and other factors that will affect the movement of the CPO prices is the price movement of other vegetable oil. And also I added here is the Brent crude oil. Why I added the crude oil prices here? Because biodiesel or the veg oil used as a biofuel or as an energy feedstock has increased. From the past, it's only less than 10%, but now 37 to 30% of the veg oil used as a feedstock to produce biofuel. So because of that, they're also correlated with the crude oil price. So when crude oil price spike, you can see veg oil prices will spike together. Okay, so you can see all the veg oil prices are positive correlated. It's just like who outperform, and all depends on supply and demand of each veg oil each type of this vegetable oil. So again, the other factors that you need to watch is how China Dalian exchange, the palm oil future react, because if I pull the two prices together, although it's a different currency, you see, but you look at the dark green and the light green. Dark green is Bursa, light green is the Italian DCE, Olin, active one. They are always positive correlated. It's just like which one outperform which, but the movement wise, so which, like when because Thailand opened earlier, DC opened at 9 o'clock and Bursa opened at 10:30. If DC have something happen, it will affect the movement as well. So you might want to take a chance like to look at how's the opening or how's the price movement at DCE as well. So because both contracts are trade quite close to each other. So what are the major opportunity and risks to watch in the palm oil market? So I do a very quick summary of this in 3 slides. So if Indonesia as the largest producer and as the largest user, so anything happen in Indonesia that will affect the whole market, the whole palm oil market. So as I put my title, when Indonesia sneeze, the oil palm market will catch the cold. So what are the major things that we need to monitor in Indonesia? Indonesia have a very protective local market. So they want to ensure that there is enough supplies of cooking oil in domestic market, they come up with this domestic price obligation and domestic market obligation policy. Domestic market obligation is just they require all the exporter for certain product, as I mentioned here, CPO, RBD palm oil is a refined palm oil, palm olein, UCO, and they actually added some others product, 1 or 2 products in recently, a couple of months ago. So when you want to export, you need to have a permit. How do you get the permits? By supplying a oil to the domestic market at the price that's set under the domestic price obligation. It's very low price. It's like our minimum prices that we buy our the 1 kilo pack cooking oil in the market. So they also have the kind of price control of their so-called the consumer pack minyak kita. So with this control, somehow what we will change, like every 1 tons of the olein that you supply to the local market as minyak kita, you get a certain ratio for your export. So that, for example, 1 ton you get 4 tons of export permits, right? But during the month of like the Puasa month, the Ramadan month, right? They want to ensure there's enough oil in the market. They can adjust the ratio. Or they have to say, oh, I don't care, I keep the ratio, but you need to supply more. So these are the policy will affect, because when you supply more domestically, means that you have less ability to export. So Indonesia being the largest palm oil exporter, if you have a limitation of export, that will actually create the fluctuation in the market as well. So this is something that we need to watch, and that relates to the export policy. So in the export policy, beside that, they also have taxes, their export tax, their export levy, and occasionally they like to do restriction or ban on certain products like now, So all these policy, export related policy, will have the impact on the price. So I just give a couple of examples, like 28 April 2022, as I mentioned, it's not 23, sorry, it's 2022. Indonesia actually banned the export of palm oil, and that's why the price spiked up. And like January 2025 until now, they still restricted the export of the used cooking oil and pomade. That export ban will always create a 2-tier market, and these are the policy that you need to really monitor. So somehow you see the headlines, will keep flashing from the Indonesia, especially during the Ramadan months. There's always a lot of restrictions, a lot of rumors will be out. And when we look at this, is more on the origination when you're at the producing country. But at the destination market, we should say the destination means that the importer, our buyer, the palm oil buyer, there are various policy, trade, non-trade, the biofuel policy. These are the major risks that we need to track, how this will affect. So India, the policy they like to use is always adjustment to the import tariff. So when they increase, they will think that when you increase, usually will reduce the demand, right? Higher tariff reduce the demand, so the prices will weaken. So if they cut, they will say like, oh, they will increase the demand. So this will be the impact on the market. And Europe, they don't really use the tariff, but they like to use the non-tariff barrier. So they are like, say, they have a deforestation risk, they are limit the palm because you have the deforestation risk, or they have others so-called like qualitative measurement, or not say qualitative, like quality measurements that trying to set the bar high or to restrict. They won't ban, they will just restrict the import, make it more difficult for you to sell into the market. Okay, so in China, what we need to monitor, what are the key things is what's the China demand of soybean import. If you recall, just a couple of days ago when Argentina said, oh, I am going to cut my export duty on my soybean, on the agriculture export. So you can see, the CPO prices reacted negatively because people will expect China will buy more soybean, will crush more soybean, will have more soybean oil. This is how the whole market correlated, right? So for China's side, their soybean import is very critical. And I think nowadays, when China fight with other countries, especially when they say, oh, I want to restrict the canola from Canada, that will also affect the whole, because always remember all the oil seeds market and vegetable market are interrelated. US is always the biofuel policy and the import tariff. So Trump's like to know this is a Trump tariff that actually created a lot of noises. But the impact on palm is very limited because US is a very small market, and yes, US, whatever US is buying, the palm they are buying or they're importing are mostly for the functional oil, to produce, I mentioned, to produce certain food product, and it's all certain hygienic products, which is very hard for them to replace. So even though they have 19% tariff from Malaysia, Indonesia, buyer have to absorb. They will reformulate, but it will take time. But at this point of time, buyer have to absorb, and they have to pass on or not. That is their problem. But they have still buying, but they have slowed down the buying. But we still have to watch. But of course, there's a recent news talking about they may have a zero import tariff on the palm from Malaysia, Indonesia. It's still negotiating. So these are the headlines you have to watch out. So latest, the last but not least, as I mentioned just now, the weather impact. So remember, the weather not only affecting palm, the weather will also affecting other agricultural products, just like our competing the soybean, the rapeseed, the sunflower, The rapeseed is also, rapeseed in Europe, also same as canola. So in Canada, they call it canola. So it's rapeseed as well. So I have highlighted the risk of El Nino and La Nina because when El Nino is dry in our world, it will be wet in the US and in Argentina. And Brazil have a two part. The northern and southern are very different because Brazil is very big. Yeah. So you have to monitor so I do a very quick summary in this one slide. So what happened is when there is a El Nino, then Malaysia, Indonesia will be dry, then the yield will drop, when there's a La Nina, midterm, immediate impact is a disruption, but in the midterm is higher as water is good for palm. Brazil, you have to see the Brazil weather. Is it a northern side or is it a southern side where how the Brazil the weather impact? So El Nino is wet in Argentina and US, and La Nina is dry. So at this point, as we have La Nina, the short La Nina risk in this part of the world, you are hearing that US having a dry, and market start worry whether US production will be high, any impact on their yield, because now they are in the growing stage and coming to the harvesting. And also the Brazil, with the dry weather, is Brazil planting on track, is Argentina planting on track, will there be a delay? So these are the factors will affect the price movement. I think with this is my last slides on the impacts and the fundamentals of the palm market and the drivers. So I will conclude here. This is my last slide. I will back to the moderator, CY.